Hey, well, let's just fire it up and see what happens.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back into Bufnagle the podcast. I'm Zach, and as always, I'm joined by Rafe. Rafe, how are we doing today?
Hey, Zach, I am doing fantastic. It's been a wonderful weekend, as it typically is. The days without work are good. Days with work are good, and days without work are especially good, just because you get to do your own thing, and that's kind of you know what? That's the way it ought to be. It should be. We should get to do fun things, and that's one of these fun things is doing the podcast with you. So yeah, it's great. It's doing great.
All right, that's good to hear. So, do we have a sponsor this week?
Hey, Zach, we have a sponsor, our friends at the Buck and Bull Boutique, BUCK, and Bull, BULL, Boutique on Facebook and Etsy have once again decided to risk their livelihood, their good name and reputation by associating themselves with us. The Buck and Bull Boutique creates handmade. What was that?
By Bufnagle.
Oh, yes. Well, it's the Buff and Bull Boutique by Bufnagle in Murfreesboro, right? I mean, so there's a lot of bees there. So, I was thinking, Zach, I got to interrupt the thing here. We know a lot of people that do bees, and I'm thinking we're going to get some bee guys on here to talk about bees, so we don't have to pretend to be apiarists. We can just bring them on.
That sounds like a fun plan.
All right, so that's okay. Okay, so back to Buck and Bull Boutique. The Buck and Bull Boutique creates handmade jewelry, gifts, decor, and clothing with new items released weekly. Custom orders always welcome. And I had discussions with Kayla about this, and she was like, yes, that's where most of the stuff comes from. If you see something, you think of something, you conceive something in your wildest dreams that will make your life beautiful and your house pretty, then you contact the Buck and Bull Boutique, and Kayla will make that dream come to reality. And she even promised that if you tell them, this is nutty, Zach. If you tell Kayla at Buck and Bull Boutique that the Bufnaglers sent you, then you will get 15% off of your order. So that is a deal that is like, I don't know. Is there a history of the world's greatest deals? I mean, this is like getting Tom Brady like for a rookie salary. All right, that's what it's like. All right, so even current Tom Brady, all right, he's old, but you can get him for a rookie salary. It'd be awesome. So Buck and Bull Boutique on Etsy and Facebook, they are sponsoring us this week, and we are very grateful to them. As always, we are very grateful to our listeners as well. We would not do this if nobody. Well, maybe we would, Zach, but we it's better to have people listening than not listening, because otherwise we just have to tell your mother that this is what we did to keep ourselves out of trouble. But we're thankful for our listeners. And as always, you can reach us at bufnagle@bufnagle.com, Instagram, Twitter. Like, we're probably on things that don't even exist yet, is what I'm thinking. And you can find the podcast itself on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, Face, Twit thing, whatever it is. So you look around, do a Google search, and maybe we're going to start our own platform, Zach, and be like Bufnagle Podcast on podcast at bufnaglepodcast.com. Podcast.com, something like that. So anyway, that's where we are, Zach. Right. So how's your week been?
It's been a pretty solid week for me over here in the Bufnagle World Legal Headquarter place that I call home, also known as Minneapolis. But a couple of weeks ago, we had a discussion about Cleopatra, ancient civilizations, and how Cleopatra was a Greek and not an Egyptian, but she did walk like an Egyptian. And since mostly me, like talking about ancient civilizations and other misunderstandings other misunderstandings from ancient civilizations. One of those misunderstandings is the fact that nobody in the history of mankind ever thought the Earth was flat. That myth was used to make people from ancient times sound stupid, and additionally, no one actually believed that myth, and that myth is categorically false.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I was thinking of a way to kind of string this, put this. It's hard to talk about a myth, right? All right. So the way to think about it, I think, is that okay, so there's a myth, right? And the myth is that the world is flat. That's a myth, right? And that's myth number one. Myth number two is that people actually believed myth number one. Right. So I could make a myth. Okay, let's make a myth. Here's a myth. My house is made of cheese. Okay, that's a myth. Okay. And if in the future you said that people back in ancient times believed that I lived in a house full of cheese, well, that would be a myth about the myth. Right. And it's of the same caliber. And I wouldn't mind living in a house of cheese, but I don't live in a house made out of cheese.
Yeah.
So it's not okay. Now I'm going to bet, Zach. I'm going to conjecture, and this is a conjecture that I'm going to tell you. So you have something else.
Yeah. So this myth inside a myth thing is kind of like the Russian nesting dolls. There's a doll inside the doll inside the doll inside a bat, probably, maybe. Who knows?
That that is it's like the meta myth, right?
Yeah.
It's not metamucil. It's meta myth. It's a meta myth. Okay, but I'm going to guess that 400 years from now, somebody's going to come up with a myth that says no one ever believed the myth that people used to believe, the myth that the world was flat. So people are going to say that, oh, well, no one ever thought that people thought that the world was flat. And we'll be like, yeah, we live right now in a world where people believe that people believed the world was flat. It's just going to keep spiraling. There's no way it's going to stop.
Just going to add more Russian nesting dolls to our nesting dolls.
Yes, and we're going to get, what we need, Zach, is we need Bufnagle nesting dolls. We're going to call the Buck and Bull Boutique and get some nested Russian myth dolls, and we're going to sell them on the Buck and Bull Boutique.
No, we're going to do one better than that. We're going to contact Buck and Bull for Bufnagle Russian nesting dolls, and then we're going to give them away to some of our listeners as a giveaway, as a thank you for sponsoring us. So we'll have more information about that in the future.
Yeah, so we're going to put Bufnagle marketing and promotions onto that project as soon as we hire somebody to do our promotions and marketing. But the idea of the Bufnagle nested myth Russian doll thing is that is I can't believe no one has done that. Like at the center is what's at the middle of the nesting doll? It's a flat earth. it's a little flat earth, and then around the outside is a brain that thinks about the flat earth.
The dragons that you run into on your way over the edge of the flat earth.
That's right, because the flat earth. So basically, let me see if I got it right. All learned people in antiquity knew that the earth was round. I guess there were farmers here and there that kind of conjectured that the earth was flat. And for practical purposes, for them, it was.
Yeah, when you say, practical purposes, that it was flat, their ground was flat, but they could look over the horizon and they couldn't see more than 2 miles, but they knew the land continued. So it wasn't like they were like, oh, the land drops off and I die.
Right. And so anybody who's climbed to a mountain, like, okay, so I went to graduate school in Fort Collins, Colorado. All right. And that is right nestled up, cities always nestle up against the foothills, right? I mean, they don't like invade the foothills, right? They're nestled in there. And Fort Collins, Colorado was nestled up against the foothills of the Rockies. And there's a geologic formation right there against Fort Collins that is called Horsetooth Rock, right? And it looks from a distance, it looks like a set of like molars from like I don't know why they're horse teeth, but they are some kind of like they look like molars, okay? And you can climb to the top of Horsetooth Rock. And if you get up there, you're at like Fort Collins is at like 5,000 feet, and top of Horsetooth Rock's maybe 7,000 feet. I don't know something, but you can see, Zach, you can see the curvature of the earth from the top of that, looking east. You can see that the earth curves. And so any mariner will tell you that the earth is curved, because when the ships come in, it's not like it's small and it gets bigger. You see the mast first, right? And people in the crow's nest can see the land before people standing on the deck.
They have someone in the crow's nest spotting out and yelling out land ho when they spot land when they're traveling west to explore new things, or if they're traveling east to explore an area they've never seen before. They need a guy up there so they can spot further out, even they're at the same point, so they can see these things. The fact that people from antiquity had all of these tools in place, granted very simple tools, a guy in a crow's nest, to be able to make where they're going easier, is all you really need to know, that the earth was never flat, and no one ever thought the earth was flat.
Right. No educated, no person that ever got past age about 12 thought that the earth wasn't anything other than flat. In fact, Eratosthenes, I always say Eratosthenes, but I don't think that's right. I looked it up. It's Eratosthenes, which is really hard to spell. I have trouble with these Greek names. They're just like, they're not, I wish they were like Tim. All right. Tim the Greek. 3rd century BC. Okay, so he was 276 to 194 BC. Eratosthenes,
right after Rome fell.
Yeah. So he was this Greek guy, and he computed, Zach, the circumference of he estimated it, right? I mean, he didn't actually take a tape measure and measure it, but he did a couple things. They call him kind of a polymath, which means a lot of things and math, right? I wonder if you could be like a poly art if you knew a lot of things and art, or like a poly chef if you could cook. But anyway, he was a polymath.
A poly Zach.
You are kind of a poly Zach. You know what's great about this podcast, Zach, is we're doing this now where we can talk and we can see each other. And we have some people here in the audience that are shaking their heads a lot with some of these things. Like, I'm picking up that some of these folks that are watching us from afar are disagreeing with some of these conclusions, but we know how we feel about people and their myths. So, right, for the time being, we're going to let this slide for a second. Eratosthenes estimated the circumference of the earth. He estimated the tilt of the earth relative to its orbital plane, which is like 23.4 degrees, something like that. And he also computed this thing called the sieve of Eratosthenes, which was a way to determine prime numbers.
So he was really smart.
Yeah, this was a smart dude, okay? And this was back this was back before what? This was
Computers.
back before computers, before cell phones,
before NASA.
Before all sorts of things. I mean, there were no, they had wheels, I guess. Now, Eratosthenes, his exact description has been lost. Okay, that got you write it down, eventually it's going to fall apart, right? But there's this.
I could be mistaken here. His stuff was in the Library of Alexandria, or is my time period off here?
I'm going to have to look that up. I don't remember the Alexandria. Let me see if my notes say here. I don't know that.
The lighthouse housed the library. The library and the lighthouse went down with a earthquake. I'm not sure when that earthquake was. In that library was the original plans for a steam engine.
Okay, I read some stuff about the steam engine yesterday. I was reading Stark's book, and he did mention that they had a steam engine plans, but they had used that in toys. All right, so I don't know. I'm trying to think of a toy I would want that would have a steam engine in it, and then I thought every toy would be great with a steam engine in it. I mean, think about that one. So, so back to Eratosthenes and his method for computing the circumference here. Okay, so that method's been lost, but his buddy named Cleomedes, right? This is interesting because I was looking up this guy. He is estimated to have lived sometime, get this date already, sometime between the 1st century BC and the 5th century AD.
So that's a big time frame.
It's a big time frame. So somewhere in there, he wrote a summary, okay, and that summary survives, okay. And he said this, okay, and this is kind of once you think about what's going on, you see, that's obvious. It's pretty simple to do. Now, Eratosthenes didn't do it quite at the same way, but essentially he did this, okay. So there's a well in Cyrene, which is in Egypt, all right, because all the Greeks hung out in Egypt, right, because the Egyptians.
Cleopatra was.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's where I'm going. All right, so in Cyrene, there's this well, and on the summer solstice, light would hit the bottom of the well, all right, which meant that the sun was directly overhead. All right, so the sun was directly overhead at Cyrene, but on the same day, at the same time in Alexandria, which is a distance away, the sun's shadow made kind of an angle, right? So you could take a stick. Now, there's a name for this stick that you use to make shadows with the sun. There's a name for that stick. I forget what it is. Bonus
Magical
point
stick with shadows.
Yeah, right. So it's a sun measuring shadow stick. But you take a stick, you point it at this, you point it straight up vertical, and it will make an angle. It'll have a shadow there, and you measure that right triangle, and you can measure this shadow. You can measure the angle of that. Measure the angle between the stick and the shadow. Okay. All right, and that's 50th of a circle. Okay, so that little angle there was 1/50th of a circle. And as soon as you see that, you're like, oh, well, I see where this is going. All right, so then what they did is they measured the distance between Cyrene and Alexandria. And that came out to be about 5,000 stadia, which is like the length of the...
Yeah.
It's a stadia, right? I'm sure Google will convert that for you. And it's not exactly obvious how far that was. It's somewhere between about 155 and 160 meters. It's like the length, I think, was it the length of the stadium or something? I don't know. Some has to do with walking or standing or something. We'll you know what? We'll get that for you next time. But it was about 155, 160 meters. So if that distance is 5,000 of those, and it's 1/50th of the circumference, then you can compute the
rest of the circumference.
Right, for the whole Earth is like 250,000 stadia, or about 40,000 kilometers, or about 24,000 miles. Okay, that's the circumference. It's about 24,000 miles. Those of us who are in the US, 24,000 miles. Those of you out in the rest of the world, it's about 40,000 kilometers, right? And you can do the circumference equals pi times the diameter thing, and you can get the diameter and the radius. The diameter of the Earth is about 8,000 miles. Radius is about 4,000 miles. And you can get bonus Rafe points if you can compute that and get it to meters.
Yeah, and so additionally, the Earth's circumference is 24,901 miles. So this guy was really, 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 really close using just algebra to get the circumference of the Earth.
Well, there's a little tiny bit of trig in there, but that's right. But that's no, you're right. That's really, and he did this. What year was this, Zach? About 250 BC. Okay, so this was a long time ago. So
this was also after Julius Caesar got done with the Orange Julius stand and invaded Rome and then died. But we had
it was before that. No, it was before that, right? He was like 44 BC. This is 250 BC. This was full 200 years ago. 200 years before Caesar.
200 BC or
250 BC.
I thought you said AD. Okay. I got ahead 500 years.
Yeah. So think about that. Okay. So when someone tells you that the ancients were we have that perspective that we are somehow better, right? And because look, you and I are talking. You're in Minnesota. I'm in Nashville. We got people watching on the internet web, all right? And they didn't have that. So therefore they got to be dumb? No. They had what they had, and we stand on their shoulders, and we are thankful for all the stuff they figured out, okay? So for a long time, we've known it's been around.
Yeah, and additionally, you make the point that we're better than them because we have this technology, but they use their lack of technology to a greater degree than we ever use our infinite amount of technology to like no degrees. So they're doing infinitely more with less, and we're doing like nothing with so much.
We send cat videos over the internet.
Yeah. I mean,
right, so that's got to be a big plus, right?
And we do babies in cat beds too, so that counts for something. We
have known people that use their cat bed as their newborn baby's little resting spot, and that's probably okay if it's the right little baby. Now, I think, okay, so now this is the ancient Greeks in 250 BC, but other cultures were doing similar stuff, right? I mean, so let's not, it wasn't just the Greeks who were doing this. I mean, other cultures had
Chinese and Japanese, their stuff with calendars and the zodiac and all of those type of things, really impressive. Even if you look at in South America and Central America today, what you had those ancient civilizations, the Aztecs and the Mayans, and the things they were able to do with calendars just by looking at the stars and the way the Earth moved and turned, even though most of the ancient civilizations believed that the Earth was the center of the universe and not the sun. They still understood these things to a very high degree.
Yeah, and so that's a subtly different question, okay? Because there's this idea about, you know, the Earth. Well, the Earth goes around the sun. That's fact, right? Well, that's a true thing that the Earth goes around the sun. But that doesn't mean you can't do astronomy in a different way, okay? And and that's where a lot of people say, well, back then they thought the Earth was the center of the universe. And you know, you can do everything you need a calendar to do by putting the Earth at the middle. All right. So they had this concept, and it comes basically from Aristotle. They had this concept that the Earth was at the center and it was fixed, right? Because it's hard to argue that we're moving. I mean, that's a difficult thing. You're standing right here. This is pretty solid floor I'm sitting on. All right. So you got the Earth at the middle, and then outside of that, you had this series of celestial spheres, they called them, right? And outside of the Earth was the moon, and past the moon was the sun, and past the sun were the stars, and then there were these planets that kind of, all right. So, and all of these things kind of rotated around us, but at different rates, right? And that ordering produced things like eclipses, okay? And so there was this, it took a long time for mankind to get this idea that things were actually ordered, that there was a system in place, that there were principles that the natural world followed. It wasn't just chaos. All right, now you had these planets. The planets made things really, really difficult because the planets didn't follow the same rules as everything else. I mean, that word planet in Greek means wanderer. All right. And if you watch where the planets are relative to the stars, they have strange motions. They don't always go in the same direction. They go retrograde motion back and forth. And right. So you can have a geocentric model of the solar system, and you can have a heliocentric model of the solar system. All right. And they help you describe what you've seen and help you predict what you're going to see. So if you want to know when the floods are coming, or when the eclipse is coming, or when you're going to have a full moon and that sort of thing, they can do that.
Or the snow's coming. There's these ideas, and we talked about this briefly before, about the way that the ancients were able to use the stars to predict crop cycles, and to be able to do that very effectively so that they could have a civilization, and that civilization could thrive. Because they knew when to plant the grain, so that they could harvest the grain at the right time, so that they could eat the bread so they don't die.
That sounds like Chicken Little, right? It's like you got to plant the grain to eat the grain, right? So, okay, but this nature of the world thing sits on top of a lot of that stuff. And a lot of the stuff in the West came from this Aristotle's model.
Cillian.
Of the way the world worked. All right. So he kind of said that there were four things, that he called them earth, water, air, and fire. Okay. And so if you take and they were kind of sequenced like that. You got earth is the heaviest thing, and it's heavier than water. So if you take a rock and you put it in water, the rock sinks because it's heavier than the water. Right. And then you got air, and you put air in water, it floats to the top because the air is lighter than the water. And fire rises to the top. Everybody knows the heat rises. And not only that, the fieriest thing in the whole world is the sun up in the sky. Right. So there was this model of the world that kind of assigned this directionality, or this sequencing of the components of nature. Okay. And so that's how they view the earth. And then, so people said, okay, Aristotle, that sounds like a pretty awesome thing. But if that's the case, why do we have oceans? Why do we have land? And why are we and that was a really tough question. And they worked on that for a while. And this is one of those things that you can see that when the model starts to fail with basic questions, you got to rethink your model. Right. And that's why the Copernican model of the solar system took hold, because it worked better with things like gravity and force, and Galileo and Kepler and all those guys. Right. So, but it's important to understand what the ancients, at least prior to the age of discovery, what they thought about the nature of the earth. And the idea was like, there was this model there that with the earth and the water and the air and the fire, and there were oceans and land, right? And the idea was eventually they came up with this. They said, well, right, so God knew we needed a place to stand. So what he did is he kind of pushed all the dirt to one area, to one side of the ball that we're on. All right. So he said, on this side of the ball is all the land, right? And they pretty much knew 3 pieces of land. They called them Europe, Asia, and Africa. Those were the 3 places.
Yep.
Right. And they pretty much figured the only thing that made any sense then was that everything else on the planet had to be water. Okay. So the only question then was whether, they all knew it was round, and the question was, how big is it really? We had some estimates from the Greeks, and some other people did estimates like that. It's really interesting to look at. If you look at these old maps from like from the pre-Middle Ages and like the 1200s, you see these things that they call. You ever heard of this thing called a TO map?
Yep.
Letter T, letter O. Right. So the idea is like, so I want you to pretend, like, take your pencil. All right. And those of you following along at home, take your pencil, all right, and draw yourself a circle on your paper. All right. And then I want you to draw a vertical line through the middle of the circle. So you have 2 half circles side by side like this. Okay. Okay. And then I want you to take the half circle on the left, and I want you to split it horizontally. Okay. So what you should have is you should have a half circle on the right, and you should have 2 quarter circles on the left. All right. And then the big piece on the right, I want you to label Asia. And the one on the top, I want you to call Europe, right? And the one on the bottom left, I want you to call Africa, okay? And that's how they saw the world, was this model, okay? And off on the right here, outside of Asia, I want you to write Orient, right? Because that is the Orient. And you know what that word means?
That's where the sun originates from. So that's the origin of the sun. So that's, the sun is on the east. So we refer to Asian countries sometimes as Oriental countries or the Orient. It's not a racist thing. It's not a negative connotation thing. It's just a way of referencing the fact that that's where the sun starts and that's where the day begins.
Right. And that's what the word means. The word Orient means to rise. All right. And on the other side, and this is a word most people forget, is on the left side of this circle, you're going to write Occident, Occident. All right. And I've heard of places like Occidental College, and it's right. So Occident means setting or going down. Okay. So on the east, you had the Orient, and on the west, you had the Occident, and then you had Europe, Africa, and Asia. And if you look at these, you'll see these drawings of like the king holding, like, remember in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the guy's holding the holy hand grenade of Antioch. Okay. It's this ball with a little cross on the top, and it's split into the T and the O. And that's what they did. Okay. So if you take this thing and put the Orient at the top, if you orient it up, then those lines that you drew will make a T, and the circle around it is the O. Okay. And those lines there represent bodies of water. Okay. So you have the Mediterranean splits Africa and Europe. And then you have like there's a river in Russia that kind of splits Europe and Asia, and Africa and Asia are kind of split by the Nile. All right. So that gives you this TO map, which is really important to understanding the earth. And this is how everybody viewed this stuff, in terms of that's how the earth is set up. And that's why you can be able to go west to get east.
Yeah. So they didn't, especially Europeans and Asians and Africans in early ancient civilization time, they didn't think there was a North America. They didn't think there were 2 other continents hanging out on this other side of the earth, because they didn't have a model that made it exist. So that's why people wanted to go west to get to the Indies.
Yeah. In fact, it's not that they didn't know it. They knew it couldn't exist, right? I mean, it was that dramatically pounded into their heads, is they knew there can't be anything there because all the land got pushed over here. They knew that's what it was.
The land.
Yeah, I was like, holy cow, this must look free. Look at all this land. And there's a lot of land over there in North and South America. That was a really big thing. And to empirically reject this model of the earth took a long, long time. You got to keep in mind how dramatic that was. And it's not because they were dumb. It's just because their model didn't fit their data. And it takes a long, ask anybody whose data doesn't fit their model. One of the first things they do is reject the data. All right. And that's a,
that's
kind of a,
that's like your job, is to reverse reject the data.
Yeah, well, that happens a lot. In fact, I see that a lot. I work with data quite a bit, and people's reaction typically is to reject the data and keep the hypothesis until they are forced at gunpoint to make the right conclusion. So if you draw this map here with Europe over here on the far left, the farthest west thing of that is Portugal. Right, it sits right out on the edge of the Iberian Peninsula, with right off, just it's the west part of Spain is Portugal, right? And the Portuguese saw themselves as like
naval kings and queens. They were
right
before the Spanish Armada was the Spanish Armada. Like, let's not forget that Portugal's navy was world class, and the British to a certain degree were as well, because they were going back and forth to the English Channel, hanging out with the French for some reason.
Well, the British were French, right? I mean, that's where they came from.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So, but Portugal was essentially the end of the world, right? And they had this vision, and you got to keep in mind how the ancients, like prior to 1500, how they viewed the East. All right. The idea was that everything happened in the East and then progressed to the West. All right. So the sun rises in the East and sets in the West. Eden. In Genesis, Eden is in the East, all right? And all the rivers flow out of the East, right? And all the knowledge comes out of the East. So the idea was like they held tremendous reverence for Japan and China and the Asian countries, because that's where things started. Those were the basis, right? And knowledge would pass from East over to West. So you got to see, like in 1400, you're living in Portugal. You're like, we are it. We're the end. Like everything's going to come over to us. And there's no more other. There's no other place to go. We can kind of go tooling around in the ocean there, but if we go west, we're just going to end up back in the Orient. And we know it's too far to go because we can't keep fresh water long enough. We can't keep hardtack.
Scurvy, if we don't have enough oranges, it's bad things are going to happen.
Right. And if you can't get, Zach, I kind of miss that. I mean, we used to have all these diseases with these really great names, like scurvy and rickets. And now what do we have? We got COVID. All right, really?
So if COVID had a better name, would you be more of a fan of it?
I think it would be more fun to say. I mean, not only that, it's just COVID-19. So like we're going to get another one. I mean, it's like we're going to keep numbering them. Scurvy and rickets are two top ones in my book.
Scurvy 19. Let's just, like bring it back from the dead.
So yeah, you get scurvy if you get enough vitamin C, and those guys out on the ships when you're traveling, it took a long time for Columbus to get from Spain to the New World to the Caribbean. It took he left in 3 months to get there. It was a long time. All right. So Portugal saw itself at the edge of the world. Here's a little summary. All right. The earth is round, and everybody always knew it was round. The ancients prior to 1500, they knew that there couldn't be anything on the other side. I mean, that was like, they knew it. It was like there was never any argument on that. Okay. The science was settled, right? That was it. There was nothing on the other side. Right. And the only thing was a question of size, right? So when Columbus negotiated with Isabel and Ferdinand, he brought some bad math with him.
Yeah. So the reason everyone looks down on Columbus there's a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is the fact that he miscalculated how long it would take to get to India or the Orient. And because he miscalculated, nobody wanted to give him money to send boats off to die and never come back. Because they knew that even if they got to where they needed, the spices, the gold, the additional things on those boats were worth infinitely more than whatever they would pay him. Like, it just did not make an economic sense to send Columbus across. Additionally, Columbus was looking for a way to get to the Orient that was beyond the Silk Road used by Marco Polo, because they wanted a faster way to travel and get these fun spices that makes British food not suck.
Yeah, the really good British food is what?
Indian food.
Yeah, right. So I mean, so it is the spices and the fun stuff that come out of Asia as far as food goes are off the charts. Our Maldivian friends will tell us similar kinds of things, I'm sure. Are we going to get the Maldivian on here, do you think?
I don't know. Our Maldivian contact needs to step up their game. So we'll see what we can do. But I think that would be a fun adventure.
We do have listeners in the Maldives, and if you don't know where they are, then you should keep listening to this podcast, and you might learn that. Otherwise, you can look it up and find out where the Maldives are.
India, and well, you have to make sure you're looking for it, or you will just be lost in the ocean for a while.
That's a good. You have to know it. It's a very small thing. All right, so food sucks without spices. All right, and there are other things that go back and forth along the Silk Road. And the problem was that was a very expensive endeavor. Right, every time you hand it off to another guy, they take a cut. Right, so by the time things go from the Philippines onto the continent and then across, however you get them into to London. Can you imagine how expensive that is? So the same with Spain and Portugal. Portugal started exploring a way to go around the southern hemisphere, or into the southern hemisphere, around Africa and around the Cape of Good Hope. Now, Cape of Good Hope is appropriately. It is a bad, it's
named the Cape of Good Hope, so it would encourage sailors to make the trip. So it was almost to trick them to like, hey, you might be able to do this.
Yeah, because the naming it the Cape of Certain Death would not carry much weight with sailors. So we're gonna this conversation that Zach and I are just having right now started with our discussion that we want to talk about Magellan. Right. And we're going to get there, but I'm learning that there's a lot of groundwork we have to lay out. We want to make sure that we have all these things in place. The Portuguese started going down Africa and around, and that's where we're going to leave it for right now, I think. Zach, is that, am I right on time?
Right. So this conversation is going to springboard a mini series we're going to be doing about the age of exploration and exploration in general of ancient civilizations and exploration of the world and exploration of human endeavors, which is something we're diving deeper into on this podcast as well. So this kind of provides that framework. So when we talk about Magellan, Columbus, even Leif Erikson discovering Greenland and parts of Canada, and my favorite place, the Maritime Provinces, we'll have an understanding of what they were doing and what they were searching for on those trips and those journeys.
Yeah, so we're going to leave this right like this. I'm going to leave this for you, all right, people to think about. In 1291, prior to 1300, just a little bit after Thomas Aquinas, but 200 years prior to Columbus, and maybe 300 years after the Vikings, right? The Vivaldi brothers from Italy sought to reach the Indies via the ocean, and they sailed into the Mediterranean and then west and never came home. All right. And the only record we have is that they sought to reach India via the ocean and they never made it back. So who knows? If you find them, let us know and we'll rewrite the story. All right. They went off, we think, and they made they turned into like court composers or something. Vivaldi brothers did that. They didn't make it. All right. And some other people did some other things out in the Atlantic. It's a fascinating story. We're going to dig more into that in the coming weeks, along with some other things that we're looking at.
Yeah, that's the plan. Just a couple of production notes, because we have our director actually on the call here today, who's providing us a little updates and maybe corrections on some things we missed earlier. Polymath, the actual definition, is not someone who knows a bunch of things in math. It's just a person who knows a bunch of things. So the actual definition is a person of wide-ranging knowledge or learning. So there is that. Additionally, I mentioned, yes, thank you to our director. We're not done thanking him, though. Additionally, I mentioned the prototype steam engine. It's also known as a hero's engine, or, ready for my mispronunciation of Greek words, an aeoliphilia, a hero's engine.
Hero's engine.
You can Google that. It was first described in the first century AD. So 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, so it was a little steam engine that came.
Yeah, doing things 2,000 years ago. So those are two notes on that.
The other thing to keep in mind is we have a lot of people now working on a lot of problems, and they didn't have anywhere near as many people working on problems. I mean, they had plenty of sheep and plenty of oxen and flamingos and stuff like that, but they don't solve problems, and people do, and we have a lot more problem solvers now. So that's something to keep in mind. They just didn't have the sample size. So, all right,
Yeah.
all good.
Yeah, that's all good. So we thank our director for helping us clean up some production things we had there. Hopefully we can have him on a little bit more and he can help clean up some things as we discuss through, and we'll do a little cleanup at the end of each episode. If you don't follow us on Instagram, you should, because we post fun stuff, I think. You make sure you follow us on the podcast machines, on your Spotify, on your Amazon Music, on your Apple Music, on wherever podcasts are found. Leave us a review, give us a follow, say nice things about us. If you have comments, concerns on how we can do better in the future, let us know. We're always looking for improvement, always looking for feedback. And that's all I've got. Rafe, you got anything else?
I got nothing, Zach. I want you guys all to have a Bufnagle day, and thanks for listening.
That sounds like a great plan. We'll see you guys next time, and take care.